Anyone at the Exigna stage truly won't find it that difficult to look at a house they like and take it over, Ryuk agreed. Either by simply chasing the owner off with a threat, or more smartly through the use of techniques or artifacts to take control of their mind and become the unknown boss behind the scenes. I am strong enough to waltz into a bank with billions of AMA notes and drain it of all its money without the security even noticing they've been robbed until I am long out of the place. I could use that money to live like a king. That really is true, Ryuk said with a nod, and Odette flashed her evil grin, one that faded with his next few words. But I work as an archguard, and I get paid for completing loyalty quests. It could be risky sometimes, but there is peace. The peace of knowing I'm not hurting anyone, which is something I will be doing if I walk into that bank and steal $1 billion. I live in a rented house, but it's peaceful, as I know I am truly welcomed in it, and not just taken over with force and becoming the secret mastermind of it. That will also do nothing but bring pain to those who originally lived in it. If power brings nothing but pain to people, what use is it? He explained at length, watching as Odette looked silently at him before she finally sighed. You risk your life for 10,000 AMA notes, calling it nobility, while someone else uses a mind control charm to become a city's hidden ruler, controlling lives from the shadows and even influencing yours, she whispered. In the end, you both live in a house and eat food. Except you bleed and almost die for it, and he never has to, she said, slowly turning to look at the crowds below. You talk about pain, as if the people of this world are so innocent, as if they'd shed a single tear if they knew what you were and what power runs through your veins. Tell me, Ryuk, those same people you're trying to protect, if they found out what you are and what you could do to them, do you think they'll thank you for not robbing them or taking their house? She said, turning to look back at him. His eyes creased in thought, as it was something he had never considered, but she continued. They wouldn't thank you for your restraint, Ryuk. You know what they'd call you? Odette said, turning to him with that evil grin. They'd call you a threat, a ticking bomb, something unnatural that must be kept in chains. And if their fear takes deep root inside them, and they suddenly come upon a power equal to yours, they wouldn't hesitate to come for you in the night and burn your house down while you sleep, drag your body into the street and spit on it like you were filth. Then, they'd loot what was left and walk away a little richer, she said with a silent scoff. You think that by showing restraint, you think that by being kind, the world will show you kindness. But you're wrong. If the world held the power that you hold, they would try to get rid of you first. At this point, she could hear his heartbeat skip once. That is the truth of the world you think you're protecting. It doesn't love you back, Ryuk, nor would it ever return your love. It never even loved you at all from the beginning. You seem to have been born in this idealistic world, where kindness will be repaid someday, and that's how I knew you were not from Amamura. Anyone from this place knows that truth, although they're good at hiding it behind kind smiles that fool people like you, who think the world is all lovey-dovey, Odette said with a helpless shrug before she began walking toward the stairs that led into the building. If you wish to be an exception to reality, I will not force you to change. But, she said, pausing on the first step as she turned to look at Ryuk. If one day you find a blade stuck into your neck from behind, and you turn, only to find the person who did it was the one you had shown mercy and kindness to all your life, then remember that I, Odette, once told you this world doesn't reward kindness or mercy, she said very clearly. If that happens, blame nothing but your naiveness, as it is what killed you in the end. With that, she continued into the mansion, saying as she went, Go check up on your family. You can come back tomorrow, and you'll find me here. The sound of her footsteps soon faded away, but her words, they shook Ryuk more than she could have ever thought, as they brought back to him the memories of Owen. He had been supposed to kill Owen, just like he had killed the remaining 2 assassins who tried to assassinate Princess Eiffel. But he had kept Owen alive because he wanted some answers from him. Still, the reason Ryuk had been so lax about Owen, even though he hated to admit it, was that he had thought Owen would think kindly of him for sparing his life. He believed that Owen knew he could have been killed, but because Ryuk didn't and even gave him life, Owen would be grateful and cooperate with him. But did Owen cooperate? Even after Ryuk had solely spared his life, after killing off his companions, Owen had done nothing but look for a weakness in Ryuk's defense that he could take advantage of. And once Ryuk was on his last leg, the one person he had thought might show gratitude ended up stabbing him in the eye and slitting his throat. He had been kind to Owen, and naturally expected it in return. But Owen didn't repay his kindness with gratitude. It was just like Odette had said. The second people gain power equal to yours, the first thing they'll do is not repay your kindness, but get rid of you. Ryuk himself had gone through that firsthand. It made him question his own beliefs for the first time. Was this just him being himself? Or was he just being a naive fool who would only learn his lesson after death finally reaps away his life? The sound of knocking rang on the door. He could hear the sound of footsteps, and in just a moment, the knob was twisted open. Right before him stood a charming, golden-haired and golden-eyed woman. Her eyes blinked twice, matching the pace at which Ryuk's eyes also unconsciously blinked back. "Hello, Mrs." He had yet to complete the sentence when he felt the deep embrace that silenced him. She didn't say much, but he could feel the silent sobbing. It took him by surprise, as he knew Mrs. Linnea is to be an exceptionally strong woman. This wasn't like her, but somehow, it melted him as he embraced her gently. "You," she eventually forced out, after parting from him, a gleaming smile forming on her face that soon morphed into anger as she shouted, "You're grounded for a month. Wah!" He called out as he felt his hand grabbed and dragged into the house, the door shutting with a loud, "A week-long quest on a desolate planet, huh? Must be easy work for a kiddo from grade E." Old Jack's words echoed across the living room, boisterous as ever, and Ryuk grinned. But then, humph! The loud humph echoed out as Mrs. Linnea walked past, causing Old Jack's mood to shift from pride to sad. "But you know, she was really worried for you. You weren't replying to the messages, although I doubt you could even find service on such a desolate, faraway place." "Still, it was worrying," he said, this time truly seriously. And that truly was the truth, although only half of it. Not only had his wife been worried, but he had also been, after a week of sending various messages with no reply. Even after they received the message where Ryuk mentioned he might not come home that night, it only eased their fears for the first night. By the third day, things took a sharp turn. Even in the last 2 days, Old Jack had found it hard to close his eyes at night. The thoughts, mostly negative, were what came to him the most when he lay in bed, keeping him awake. But now that Ryuk was here, he could finally exhale in peace. "I also never knew it would take so long." "I'm sorry," Ryuk said quietly, but his shoulder was grabbed by Old Jack, who wiggled the sadness off of him. "You're back, and you're okay. That matters more," he said reassuringly, before getting off the sofa and waving him off. "Go get some rest. You've been at it for a week now, and I'm guessing you couldn't sleep the whole way because, of course, you were worried sick about me," he added with a grin that made Ryuk roll his eyes. "You wish." Old Jack only laughed at him before disappearing up the stairs. Ryuk remained on the sofa for a while, resting against it. The softness gave him the illusion he was slowly sinking in, his eyes closing, but then he sighed, a sound a nearby individual didn't fail to notice. "Hey, you okay?" Mrs. Linnea asked as Ryuk's eyes opened. "I am," he said with a reassuring smile, but it didn't stop Mrs. Linnea from coming to sit beside him. Even though those otherworldly shimmering eyes tried to hide it away, she could see it very clearly, the worries in the depths of them. "Tell me what you're worried about, Ryuk," she said, brushing his white hair with a reassuring smile. His irises moved to the side, but she brought them back with 2 gentle taps on his head. I, he tried to say but failed twice. Still, Mrs. Linnea's expression revealed her focused attention. "I've just been thinking about her," he finally admitted, and Mrs. Linnea's eyes gleamed. "Owen, someone's missing their little girlfriend," she said playfully, watching the pink hue that immediately colored his cheeks. "I do," he whispered faintly, and Mrs. Linnea giggled. "I just don't know what she's really up to, and that's a bit worrying," he added, and her giggling stopped, her eyebrows creasing faintly. "I think I should have told you why we allowed her to stay back at the main family ground," Mrs. Linnea said slowly. "But I figured there was no one but her who could explain it to you. Even her reason for staying was also a bit—" She paused, searching for the word, before she finally said, "confusing to us both, too." The answer made Ryuk's heart thump faster by a beat. Of course, he had been okay with Morgane not being around, because he trusted that if she was somewhere else, it must be with Mrs. Linnea and old Jack's approval. Mrs. Linnea in particular, and Ryuk trusted her. But now that she mentioned her explanation for leaving had been confusing even to her, it made him wonder just what was really happening. "Tomorrow is the 15th, right?" Mrs. Linnea called out, and Ryuk nodded. "She should be home tomorrow," she reassured, with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Linnea. I'll be going to sleep now," he said, and she nodded. "Good night, Ryuk," she waved as he disappeared into his room. She switched off the light in the living room before going upstairs to her room. Finally back home, Ryuk whispered to himself as he collapsed onto the bed, feeling the familiar warmth. Only when he was back home did he realize how much he missed being on his cozy bed. There's something suspicious about Morgane's actions in the Dominaire main family grounds. The system notification blinked in front of Ryuk, pulling his attention back, and he stayed silent for a moment before nodding his head. "Yes, I can feel it too. You can go check on her now, you know. I don't think it will take an hour. You only need not be seen, after all," the system added. And truly, it was a tempting idea, but Ryuk shook his head. "The last time I got into that place, I caused quite the turmoil," he said, thinking back to his fight with one of the elder Nogarasuk. "I have a feeling that going there a second time will cause trouble. If I sneak in and get discovered, I don't know how that may also affect Morgane. She got her tutoring elder imprisoned after the last episode, after all, although I think that went down well. Still, that's reasonable. If she gets back home tomorrow, I'll ask," he said, burying himself under the mattress. "I guess I'll check up on the others then," he thought, holding the abyssal chains in his hands. He had gotten them back from Odette before leaving. "I wonder if we've already reached the upper realm." It was dim. From the edge of his vision, he could barely register neon blue and pink lights that illuminated the room. There was the sound of hushed murmurs and fingers tapping against the air. The world felt a bit drowsy, but that was only for a moment, as in the next moment he felt full control return to him. His eyes fully opened, the world sharpening under his gaze, and the hushed murmurs turning into clear conversations between a group. His previously slow-beating heart began to increase its tempo, but then he noticed something peculiar. The neon blue and pink lights he registered weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from a thread that was very close to his vision, running across his face. His hand unconsciously reached out and picked up one of them, and the discovery surprised him. It wasn't a thread. It was someone's hair. Hair glowing with its own light, enough to provide illumination in the dark room. He turned his gaze away from the hair, looking down at his chest, and there he found a head lift from his chest, her hands rubbing her face. It resembled the gesture of one who had just awoken, but those eye rubs paused as she looked at the rising chest and the firm sound of his heartbeat. She turned her gaze from it and slowly moved upward, and their eyes met. His eyes, a shimmering purple, holding a bizarre illusion of white flames dancing in their depths. Her eyes, holding hundreds of colors, but if there was a single word to describe them, he would say rainbow eyes. Her lips opened to form an O, as Ryuk blankly stared back. For some reason, he found her oddly familiar, and that was when it occurred to him. "Wait, aren't you that?" he began, but didn't need to finish when she nodded 100 times, her O-shaped mouth turning into a cute smile. "You're awake," Ryuk said with a beam, before his face took a 180-degree turn from warm to cold. "Now, get off me," He added. She had been resting on his chest while he was slumbering, and from her sleepy eyes, he could only wonder how long that had been going on. She was a little girl, seemingly around the age of 7 or so he wasn't offended. But then, he was surprised when she latched onto him again. Holding so tight he felt his ribs getting folded into himself. The loud gasp escaped Ryuk's lips as he felt the sharp squeeze. "Hey! Get off me!" he shouted, pushing against her body, but he failed woefully. She didn't budge a single inch with the strength he was exerting, and when he tried to use more power, he noticed the strain on her soft skin. If he exerted more strength, he might end up cutting her skin. Kind of placed Ryuk in a tough position, but not for long, as he looked to the side and found the group. They were currently in a circle around the control pillar in the dim room, various holographs before them, some of which Elder Selene was tapping on. But she paused as she looked at Ryuk and the rainbow-haired girl's banter. Ryuk turned to look at Antares before he called out. "Hey Antares, what's up? Can you quickly help me drag this girl off me?" He was surprised when Antares shook his head. "Huh. It's not that simple," Antares responded. "Why?" Ryuk asked, confused. But then Antares turned to the side, eyeing Void, who was busy licking its paw. His leg moved behind Void's rear and then he pushed Void's butt forward, sending the panther dragging along the ground. But the instant the Void Panther came within 5 meters of Ryuk and the girl, his raised upper body suddenly slammed into the ground, and his skidding came to an unnatural halt. His body flattened onto the floor like a pancake, and his eyes gleamed with faint horror before he puffed into a dark mist, reappearing far away from them. You bastard!" Void cursed at Antares, puffing toward him. But Antares was already gone, flashing in and out, avoiding all of Void's claw attacks. The panther eventually gave up, turning away from him before looking at Ryuk, who stared back at him bizarrely. "Hey! Stop looking at me like that. There's a pressure field oozing from the girl and stopping us from getting within 5 meters of her. How can we help you if she's wrapped around you like that?" he said, his whiskers wiggling while giving Ryuk a look that clearly said, "You didn't know that, did you, fool?" Ryuk finally understood what was happening. His eyes scanned the surrounding space, tightening their focus, and that was when he discovered it. All around, approximately 4.7 meters from the sofa he sat on, were motes of rainbow dust, so tiny they were impossible to even notice at first glance. The rainbow dust exuded a bizarre force into the surrounding air, which had seemingly stilled under its effects. The space around them appeared locked down by this invisible energy. That must have been the thing responsible for the others not being able to get close. Then he turned back to look at the girl, and that was when he noticed the source of the field. Her rainbow hair, currently shining with its own light, wasn't just glowing. It was releasing these rainbow dust motes into the environment, strengthening the field around her. It seemed like she could feel his gaze, as her head tilted up a bit, one of her eyes slowly looking up at Ryuk. "I want to stand. You have to get off me, or I might hurt you," he said. But all he got in response was her blinking in confusion. "Is she deaf too?" He thought in disbelief, but then remembered how she had spoken to him the last time, directly into his mind. He tried to find that thread of consciousness that had allowed him access, and quickly enough, he found it, sending a wave of his thoughts through it. "Can you understand me?" "Yes, I can." The words echoed straight into Ryuk's head, and he watched as the little girl's expression slowly turned from a gleaming smile into a sad one. Then came the tears, gushing from her eyes, their color strangely the same multicolor as her hair, raining down onto Ryuk below. Did talking to her make her cry? He thought, confused. But his expression quickly changed when she suddenly buried her face in his chest, staining it with tears and wiping her nose directly onto him. "Iugiha! Can someone get this girl off me?" he roared in exasperation. But all he got in return was their forced-down laughter, as none of them moved an inch from where they stood. In the end, he could only turn back to her, silently waiting for her tears and sniffles to stop. It did, after 10 long minutes, one of the most helpless 10 minutes of his entire life, before she finally rose, her beaming smile returning. "I'm sorry," she said, rubbing off her tears. It's the first time someone has been able to speak to me," she added, but he only grew more confused. "Hey, system." "Yes. What exactly is she?" "I don't know," it replied, causing a vein to twitch on the side of his head. "I'm sorry," Ryuk said aloud. "It's not your fault," she replied, and Ryuk nodded. "It was really not. Now, can I ask you to get off me?" He asked straight into her mind, but his facial expression gradually turned alarmed as he watched her tear up again. Did you not like me?" she said, the tears ready to fall again and threaten another 10 minutes of his life. "Of course not. I like you very well," he said half-heartedly, but it was enough for the tears to stop. "It's just, I have to go meet with my friends over there and talk to them about something important. That's why I need you to climb off," he said, more softly this time. She turned to look at the group instead, her rainbow eyes shimmering with color, before she slowly backed away from Ryuk. The second she was off, Ryuk instantly became a phantom, flashing out of reality, and in the next second he was standing behind the group. They turned toward him, then quickly averted their gaze, except for one who jumped onto him, tightening her arms around him in a hug. "I've been getting too many hugs lately," Ryuk couldn't help but note, but he wasn't annoyed by this one, as the person hugging him was none other than Isha. She hugged him so tightly, she suddenly began to slip straight into Ryuk, but realized a moment later, stepping out of him again. "Ryuk!" she called out, but his face held a small humph expression. "You didn't come to save me," he said, and watched her turn to look at the rainbow-haired girl. "Something in me tells me to never come in contact with those rainbow lights of hers. That it'd be too dangerous," she replied, and Ryuk turned his gaze to the rainbow girl, who waved at him from the seat with a big smile. She looked so stupidly cute and naive that it was hard to believe the mighty Isha was afraid of such a tiny girl. "I'm sorry," she apologized to Ryuk, who rubbed her head, messing with her hair. "It's fine." Then he turned to the group, his gaze unknowingly drifting to a holograph that quickly caught his attention. He reached out and magnified the image, and there he saw a moving projection. It was the outside world, but there was no void. It was an endless stretch of red flowers and chirping birds with strange red fur. Mountainous peaks lay covered in these blooming flowers, everywhere his eyes could see. A perfect definition of an alien jungle. "Where are we?" Ryuk asked, and Elder Selene beside him responded. "A world in the upper realm, called Namor." "Finally, we're in the upper realm," he thought, exhaling in relief, but then, more, Ryuk thought in his head, but it didn't ring any bells. Until Antares spoke up after. "It's the last location where the Etheris barbarian race was said to have been seen," he said, and Ryuk's eyes gleamed with light. Of course, Antares had tagged along on their journey because he was looking for his race, the Etheris barbarians. They had already arrived in the upper realm, and now the search had begun. But then Ryuk remembered. He had never told Elder Selene the real reason he brought Antares here was to help him find his people. And yet, she had still sent her ship flying through realms in search of it. He turned toward her at that thought, but she silenced him with her words. "You can say that after we do find anything. We've been running around for the past 3 days without a single clue," she said, a bit exasperated. Ryuk hummed under his breath, turning to look again at the holograph of the outside world. Not a second, and he already had a possible solution, calling out a moment later, "Hey Void!" The Void Panther puffed into existence by his side. "Open a portal outside," he said, and Void's claw stirred to the side, opening a gigantic portal. "Can you slow the ship down a little, Elder Selene?" he asked, as she grabbed a holograph and brought the ship to a cruising pace. He turned to Antares and nodded before stepping into the portal, along with Void. The barbarian followed him in, but before the portal could close, the rest of the group immediately stepped through as well, leaving behind a single silhouette inside the ship, who stared at where they had all disappeared, blinking twice. Ha! The sound escaped Ryuk's lips as he turned around to see their entire group standing next to the ship. He remembered only calling for Antares. If you're going to search through the planet, then it only makes sense we all go together, no? Rakshasa said with her charming smile. But then, she watched as Ryuk's eyebrow creased. To go searching, huh? He muttered. Wait, you weren't planning for a search? She asked, looking at Ryuk, who shook his head. I just wanted to ask someone, he replied, and they all raised an eyebrow. Ask someone? Who? They watched Ryuk walk further toward the nose of the ship, then stopped. He closed his eyes, inhaling the forest breeze. Then his eyes opened, a blue flame slowly dancing forth from their depths. Activate King's aura. One moment, he stood there like he wasn't any different from them. Though of exceptional handsomeness and out of place due to the shimmering purple tattoos present all around him. That would only earn him a second more of a longer glance from anyone, nothing wild. But this was unprecedented, something impossible to ignore. A terrifying aura wave that sank their hearts to the bottom of their chests. Flickering blue flames appeared all around him, burning gently like a man set on fire. Air stopped moving. Sound came to a screeching stop, as if the world had been paused. And then, there was the aura that made him want to fall onto both knees. An urge Antares tried to resist with pure will, though it was still so difficult, even when the aura wasn't exactly targeted toward him. Submit to the king. Submit to the king. Submit to the king. The roar was what she heard. It was like a gong that wouldn't stop ringing, and hence brought forth a headache that tried to split her head in two. She held her reason, finding no sense in what was happening. But that only seemed to destroy her further, as the words became louder and louder. Rakshas's hand gripped her head tightly, teeth grinding together from pure resistance. But in the end, she failed. A powerful roar echoed through the forest as her form rapidly magnified. From her 2.3-meter-tall height, she grew to a hulking 5-meter-tall monster, with claws as sharp as the sharpest razors. The love symbol in her eyes began to burn with a bloodthirsty crimson light, and her skin grew blacker like soot. 2 large wings burst out from her back, followed by the curved horns that reached to the front. And from her spine, the black tail grew, ending in a weird, love-colored shape. She had been forced to morph into her true form, but doing so led to the roar in her head fading away, her eyes growing still and deadly calm. But she wasn't the only one who transformed. Right beside her was a gigantic frost wyvern covered in hundreds of shimmering frost runes, about 15 meters in size. And just to the other side was a gigantic 60-meter-tall frost wyvern, bearing 3 heads. An aura of primal savagery bloomed around her as she silently floated behind him. But what was different was that, in her eyes were flickering blue flames, impossible not to note within those silvery white irises. Void was already in his Void Panther form, the same blue flickering flames in his eyes, too. They changed to their beast forms? Antares muttered under his breath as he looked around, finding only him and Ryuk being the only 2 who remained in their humanoid forms. He turned to look at Ryuk, just the side of his face, and a sudden fear gripped him, resulting in him snapping his gaze back to the ground. Teeth clenched when he felt the crushing pressure on his neck. But then, grab. He felt the hands that grabbed at his shoulder, and instantly the pressure faded. Raising his head, he found those flaming blue eyes looking directly at him, the familiar grin on his lips. It was exactly that grin he knew from Ryuk, and it succeeded in calming his rapidly magnified fear. Hey, you ready? Ryuk spoke up, as Antares hummed confusedly. They don't look exactly friendly, he added, watching as Ryuk turned to look into the distance with faintly creased eyebrows, and Antares turned to look forward, only for his pupils to dilate in shock. For the next few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of roars, and soon enough, the sun in the sky was blanketed, causing a shadow to fall on them. And these shadows were formed from the assembly of beasts that had formed right above them, an assembly of thousands of beasts that previously lay hidden in the jungle. They came in all shapes and sizes, the smallest of them the size of an entire boulder. And the biggest of them? The ground shook with thunderous power as the ships they stood in tilted to the side. "What's that?" Antares asked out loud in shock, balancing himself not from the ship's tilting, but from the sudden aura that came from the distance. Once more the rumbling sound came, and that was when it occurred to him. The group's expression changed massively, save for Ryuk. In this jungle, they had many times come across those eye-catching mountains, whose forms lay hidden by the jungle flowers. An argument had even once broken out when Elder Klein had said the radar picks up vibrations on those rocks as if they were breathing, but they had all dismissed it with a laugh. Yet, the same mountains they had dismissed as just rocks were now moving, with an aura that shook their hearts. It was not even a tiny bit paler compared to the one they had been assaulted with from Ryuk just moments ago. A total of 3 stepped forth, and with just a few strides they were already before them. But then, something familiar reached Antares. A familiar aura that drew his soul, and his eyes turned to look up at the shoulders of these giants. And there he found them, ones that seemed no different from him. Red eyes, red hair, a body that looked sculpted from rock, oozing with incredible brute force. They stood on the shoulders of these gigantic forest golems, in 3s and 4s, their hands folded into each other, and staring right at them. The giants eventually came to stand 20 meters away from the ship, and finally, Antares saw them with clarity, the words unconsciously escaping his lips. Aetheris barbarians. At the sight of the Aetheris barbarians, Ryuk unconsciously exhaled in relief. When he had decided to get Antares back to his race, he had meant it seriously. So much so that it had even become one of his unspoken goals, which took as much priority as any of his other ambitions. He had thought they would need to search the ends of the world to find them. But in the end, it was the very first thing he was able to do with the aid of the group, of course, most especially Elder Selene. But then, when he looked closer at the Aetheris barbarians, he noticed something strange. They were weak. Each of the Aetheris barbarians stood at the Eternity stage, with only 2 among them at the Apocrypha stage. Yet, the giants whose shoulders they stood on were oozing with the Exignis stage aura. And strangely, those giants didn't seem to mind the Aetheris barbarians riding on them. Could they be beast tamers too? He wondered, bewildered. For a beast tamer to be able to tame an Exignis stage beast while being 1 or even 2 major cultivation levels lower. That was beyond his imagination. For what reason have you come to disturb the peace of Manor? The voice rang out clearly from one of the Apocrypha stage Aetheris barbarians. His cold eyes locked on Ryuk's group. There was neither warmth nor familiarity, only biting coldness. But Ryuk didn't need to reply, as Antares stepped forward, making himself clear. "Namir Donmit Mel Garano," he called out to them, in a language none of Ryuk's group could understand. But it caused the eyes of the Aetheris barbarians to widen in shock. Of course, they could see Antares and knew he was an Aetheris barbarian, but that alone wasn't enough to ease their hearts. Though rare, it was possible he had been taken captive and may have switched sides, aligning himself with the beastly aliens, thus becoming an enemy. But the words he had just spoken, that language, "You speak in ancient Theris," said the second Aetheris barbarian, the brawniest of the bunch, his voice laced with surprise. Antares' brows furrowed before realization dawned on him. "Ancient? You all no longer speak in Theris?" he asked, bewildered. One of them was about to respond, but the brawny one raised his hand, silencing him, and turned his gaze directly to Ryuk. "What is your aim?" he asked, growling silently. "He's a friend of mine, and he comes in peace," Antares answered, but the man scoffed in mockery. "Comes in peace." He turned his gaze toward the massive hovering beasts. Every creature in this forest was awakened by the release of his aura. Even the guardians, who had been in slumber for decades, were unsettled by his predatory presence. "He disrupted the peace of Manor by merely existing, and you speak to me of peace?" he snapped. And truly it was irrefutable. King's aura was an ability that forcefully took control of a beast's mind, making them subservient to Ryuk if he willed it. To anyone with a bond to the beasts, this would be considered an offensive skill. One that is not in any way inferior to a meteor falling upon the world. To call it a sign of peace was far-fetched, no matter how well-intentioned. Antares tried once more to defend, but Ryuk stepped forward and interrupted. My aim, he began, drawing all eyes toward him, is to fulfill the promise I made to my friend, Antares, of one day bringing him back to his world. Ryuk said, each word loud and clear. We've traveled more than hundreds of millions of miles across the upper realms. And when we finally reached Manor, using the intel we gathered about where the Etheris barbarians were last seen, we spent 3 days in an aimless search through this endless forestry world. His tone was calm, and it flowed so smoothly that it was hard for them to doubt that it wasn't the truth. Releasing my aura was a move done to communicate with one of the beasts and ask questions about your whereabouts. Although, it seems it caused a little commotion. He added, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Their eyebrows twitched. A little commotion? He woke up the entire planet. I think it's fair to say that anyone in my position, after everything we endured to reach here, would have done the same, he concluded. There was silence, until the brawny barbarian spoke again. I do not believe a word from your mouth, no matter how convincing, he said, cold and blunt. Ryuk returned his gaze with a deadpan look. But from your words, your singular aim was to return him to us, right? The man asked, turning to look at Antares. Then fine. He can come with us, and we'll bring him to our clan leader. But as for you, all of you must leave. It was an unfavorable conclusion, but it wasn't only Ryuk who felt that. If they won't be brought along, then I won't come with you, Antares replied immediately. The brawny man shrugged, clearly unbothered. Fine. Then leave too. The silence that followed was creeping, thick with pressure that seemed to weigh down the very air. There were 2 choices. 1. Antares goes with them and the group leaves. A hard choice, as they had no way of knowing what might happen to Antares once they left. 2. They refuse and all leave Manor. But that would mean all of their efforts in searching for the Etheris barbarians would be in vain. Antares' hands folded tightly into his grasp, his eyes turning cold. But in the end, he unfurled them, exhaling to calm his anger, then turned his back. Let's leave, Ryuk. He said it softly, but he had not taken his 3rd step when he felt his hair around him stir, ruffled by a sudden breeze. Turning back, he saw Ryuk's feet slowly rising from the ground, floating higher and higher into the sky until he matched the gaze of the 3 giants and the Etheris barbarians. I made a promise, and I traveled millions of miles for it, Ryuk said, his voice louder now. So much time I dedicated, brushing against life and death, to reach this place. And you think I did all that, just to be constrained by 2 choices which both equal me being thrown out unceremoniously. Saying this, he slowly extended his palm toward them, fingers wide. How stupid are you all? If you wish for battle, then you'll get it, the man roared brutishly. In the next instant, powerful, shockwave-inducing roars erupted from their throats as a crimson light burst violently from their bodies, piercing into the skies. The air behind them rippled violently as they charged forward with weapons drawn, hurtling toward Ryuk, whose face remained still and placid. Battle? Activate Sov. He began to call out when suddenly, a blur of motion sliced through the air, from the edge of his vision. Boom! A devastating kick smashed into the face of one of the charging Apocrypha stage barbarians, altering his trajectory and sending him crashing into the chest of the standing mountain beasts. The remaining 5 halted mid-charge, eyes wide with shock. It wasn't Ryuk who had acted. It was the one who claimed to be one of them, Antares. Now, standing firmly in their path, a deep red ripple of energy began undulating from him, resulting in a transformation. Antares, normally standing at an impressive 5 meters, continued to grow taller, expanding to a full 10 meters. His frame lengthened, not into a hulking form, but a lean, towering titan, and the scars that normally covered the entirety of his body disappeared completely, leaving his skin flawless. Stretching out both hands, red light coalesced in his palms, and a pair of battle axes materialized. He said no words, instead taking a single step forward, axes drawn behind him, and then, of all the people Ryuk had known, Antares had always been a mystery. Not because Ryuk didn't understand his background or power. No, he had heard enough from Antares to know his history, and had fought him hard enough to understand his power, including his unique ability of growing stronger with every scar. What made Antares an enigma was his shift in personality. When Ryuk first met him, Antares had been an uncaring battle god. He subdued Ryuk with a single punch, without even rising from his throne. And when he did rise to fight, he tore through Ryuk's previous nanobody, damaging it so severely that it exhausted all regenerative capabilities of even an Anunnaki model. His aura, as confident as a battle kind who had never tasted defeat. Skill, experience, speed, power. In every aspect of combat, Antares was king. Even now, when Ryuk looked at him, a part of his chest unconsciously sank from an unknown pressure. Only one other person had ever given him that same soul-deep sense of dread. Mad White. Yes, Ryuk might be stronger now. He could overwhelm both of them if needed, easily so, but he knew one thing clearly. If he were at the same cultivation stage as either Antares or Mad White, he'd be dead sooner or later. But something had changed in Antares, and it happened after he spared his life and brought him back to Endearth. Antares no longer fought with that feral hunger anymore, nor exude it in action. Instead, he became calm and quiet, almost like a tortoise retreating into its shell, doing just the bare minimum to win his fights. He no longer sought battle, only smiled softly, serenely. If Ryuk had to guess the reason for such a massive change, he'd say Antares had lost hope. After decades of imprisonment from a defeat, he must have secretly prayed for one who would end his misery of a life, but then he had been spared. A twist he could never have predicted. To wait for death for years, only to be given life? It would shake even the fiercest of spirits. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Antares' aura was reverting. But why now? Was it anger from being rejected by his own people? Or their threat of violence? Ryuk couldn't say, but one thing was certain. The battle didn't last a minute. When it ended, Ryuk took a deep breath. Fast. He's terrifyingly fast, he thought, gazing down. Below, a full kilometer radius of the forest had been razed clean, leaving the bare grounds with blade lacerations all over. Only a single figure was standing, both of his axes in hand, and slowly radiating that dominating aura Ryuk had once feared. The 6 Aetheris barbarians? Defeated. They had been subdued, their bones visible from the hundreds of axe slashes that covered their bodies, and each of them was drowning in their pool of blood. How? Blood gushed from the lips of the brawlist as he tried to raise a finger, but failed. His body screamed in pain, veins pulsing with agony, and his entire body remained paralyzed, so much so that only his eyes could move. For peak Eternity stage experts, along with 2 mid-Apocrypha stage Aetheris barbarians, all crushed by a single Apocrypha stage Aetheris barbarian. What shook them most was that he had used no art, overwhelming them all with pure speed and brute strength, and exceptional combat ability. Impossible, Domon forced out, but his words were silenced in his throat when a large hand grabbed him by the hair and raised him into the air, his feet dangling emptily. One of his eyes had been slashed away, leaving in its place the axe blade image, and the remaining one had blood slowly sliding into it. But he didn't close it. Something in his heart told him, if he did, he might never open it again. Through the blinding pain, a single realization was starting to dawn on Domon. His aura, his form, his name. Is he? You. Finally, he watched as Antares opened his lips, hot air gushing out, as his transformation faded, reducing him back to his previous height. He spoke a word that resonated within Domon's soul. To think the ones I almost died for about 4 decades ago would have forgotten my existence so fast. He muttered silently, like one speaking to himself instead, and he chuckled a bit. I guess time truly erases it all. His hands gripped his axe harder as he prepared to cleave forward towards Domon, killing him with one swift stroke. But in the end, he stayed his hands, dropping Domon onto his knees. Silently, he turned to leave, but he never took the third step when the words rang out. Time itself cannot erase your brave deeds, Warlord Antares. Antares turned back from the words, watching as the space was sliced open, and from it emerged a red-colored staff covered in ancient runes. A figure soon stepped out from it. Red-crimson hair and eyes, dusted with a little bit of gray, a sign of old age. Lacerations and marks covered every inch of his body, running across his face, but through it all, one could see the unmistakably wide smile on his face. He stepped out of the void, both hands resting on the top of the staff. Antares paused in his steps, his eyes furrowing a bit before they widened to their limit. Daragwa? He called out loud in shock. But a bizarre scene happened in the next moment as Antares suddenly flashed forward with speed towards the old man. His body jerked back as his fingers clenched into a fist before. Boom! A powerful shockwave ripped through the air. As if expecting the move, the old man also moved, his right hand shifting backwards, and then, boom! A shockwave rippled outward as both fists clashed insanely against each other. A crater formed between them as they pulled downward repeatedly until, eventually, the force ran out and both men silently let their hands fall to the side. It's been a long time, Daragwa, Antares whispered quietly, raising his head to see a drop of tears raining down the man's face. I always knew, Warlord Antares. I always knew you were out there somewhere, alive, he called out, his voice cracking the more he spoke. But he was held together by a shoulder clench from Antares before receiving a firm hug. Then we all survived the calamity, didn't we? Antares asked as the man's tears spilled forth harder. Seconds passed into minutes before they eventually parted, wiping off the tears. We survived, Warlord Antares, only due to your help. Come, let me show you our new world, he said, but then paused as he heard the sound of footsteps. Both men turned to see the battered Aether's barbarians rising to their feet. Even after being half-dead moments ago, they were already able to stand back on their feet. It was why they were part of the barbarian race. Clan leader? They all called in surprise before instantly getting onto their knees. Daragwa is the clan leader, Antares thought with a hum, a smile slipping its way onto his face. He knew who the old man beside him was. But he wasn't an old man. He was Antares's mate and old friend. His father used to be one of the important elders of their clan. Now, it seemed he had ascended the throne of the tribe. But looking at Daragwa, he could see a ghastly expression on his face. He looked at the surroundings, smelling the faint barbaric aura which no doubt belonged to Antares and these battered young men. It wasn't too difficult to piece things together after that. He turned to Antares and spoke. If you want them all dead for disrespect, then it shall come to pass right now, he said, his tone unforgiving and merciless as bloodlust came gushing out from his eyes, glaring at all 6 kneeling Aether's barbarians. But Antares waved it off. I've dealt with them as I want already. Let it be, he said, and the man's bloodlust slowly receded, although never completely. It seems like you've brought guests with you, too, Daragwa called, stepping forth towards Ryuk. When he arrived before him, he bowed silently. Thank you, he said. A simple word, but it meant everything, as Ryuk could feel the sincerity of the man's words from within. He lowered himself back to the ship before waving it off. It's fine. I think this is not the best place for a welcome. Please, return with me to the settlement. He called out to Ryuk, who agreed. He turned to look at the hanging beasts in the sky, and with a telepathic order, return. They all began turning away, soon allowing the sunlight to pour through once more. Once they left, Ryuk deactivated King's aura, and right before Daragua's eyes, he saw the hanging beasts behind the young man all begin to fade back into their humanoid forms. Surprise covered his face. For beasts to turn into humanoids meant not just power, but a very great amount of beastly purity, and 3 of them had done so. And worthy of note, he had arrived at the scene of all the forest beasts in the air, along with the guardians. Could the guardians have called for the beasts? Or could Ryuk's aura have been the one to awaken them all? Still, as the clan leader, his thoughts didn't waste a second at all, integrating naturally into his movement. A red gate opened up behind him as he ushered them forward. But then Elder Selene spoke up. "We will remain with the ship and with her," she said to Ryuk and Antris, giving a nod that both understood. In the end, Rakshasa, Elder Selene, Isha, and Void remained behind, leaving just Antris and Ryuk to follow the clan leader, who spoke to the battered Aetheris barbarians still on their knees. "Lead the guardians back to their slumbering abode, then return to the forging furnace. Remain there for a week," he called out naturally, like one giving simple instructions, but Aether's barbarians' faces pale in horror. Still, they dared not speak a word back, bowing even deeper to the clan leader, who continued into the portal. Soon, the guardians were being led into the distance, and the gate closed. It left just the hovering ship upon which they stood. "Did you find them suspicious?" Isha asked Elder Selene. She had noticed the cryptic signal Elder Selene had given to both men, and that's why she had stayed back instead of stubbornly deciding to follow after Ryuk. "No, I think they'll both be safe," Elder Selene called out, a faint smile on her lips. "I think it's time to give them both some time alone, once more," she said, leading to Isha furrowing her eyebrows. She still couldn't understand, but her next words pulled her out of her thoughts. "Let's return to the ship. I'm sure he'll be returning soon enough, and then we can continue on our journey." It had been 3 days since Ryuk had followed the clan leader, Daragua, into the portal, and within these 3 days, he had learned quite a few fascinating things. For one, even though one could say the Aetheris barbarians were living on the forestry planet of Manor, it was more complicated than that. The truth was, if anyone ransacked the entirety of Manor, they still wouldn't find any Aetheris barbarians. This was because they weren't living on the planet itself, but in a different pocket of space that existed within the Manor planet. A different space that could only be accessed by just 3 Aetheris barbarians: Elder Daragua, the brawny Aetheris barbarian that Antris had exchanged moves with previously, and one other person Ryuk didn't yet know of. Without those 3, entering the true world of the Aetheris barbarians was impossible. It was the first time Ryuk had learned that there could be such sophistication to entering a place, that there could be a deeper reality to a world than what was revealed. Speaking of the Aetheris barbarians' true world, he was currently in it, standing on the building that belonged to the clan leader. It also happened to be the tallest building in town, allowing him to see almost the entire place. The Aetheris barbarians weren't many, just about 5,000 or so, from what he could count. And for one, the place did seem to share the same ecosystem as Manor. Green grass spread everywhere the eyes could see, accompanied by chains of blue rivers that connected all over. The houses were square, the tallest being just 70 meters high, which also happened to be the one he was currently standing. The streets were neatly tiled, lampposts casting a soft crimson-orange glow over everything. Gigantic beasts served as living carriages, ferrying barbarians from place to place. Honestly, it looked like a small, peaceful village with a unique mix of cubic architecture and forestry environment, something that greatly contrasted with the Aetheris barbarians themselves, who were so muscular and battle-hardened it was as if their home should have been a battlefield. It wasn't just beautiful, it was also secure. With them living in a pocket of space and only 3 Aetheris barbarians capable of granting access, outsiders, no matter how powerful, would still find it difficult to get in, even if they captured an Aetheris barbarian. The entire experience gave him a glimpse of how he could proceed if he ever needed to possess a world of his own in the future. The second thing he found fascinating held more weight: that life, certain lives, can have more value than initially perceived. When Antris had come back, Ryuk had seen men and women break down in tears, and he had learned why. In the far past, the Etheirys barbarians had met with a single foe that was unbeatable. He had destroyed 40% of their entire population in an absolute massacre, and Antares, the warlord of the Etheirys barbarian tribe, had fought with everything he had, yet lost. In the end, when all of their deaths seemed certain, Antares had done something every Etheirys barbarian alive, and ever to be born, would forever remember. He had used one last art to send away all the Etheirys barbarians somewhere random. The catch? The art exhausted him of all of his power. He could have run and saved himself from certain demise, but in the end, he chose to sacrifice himself to let the remainder of his race survive. A noble, selfless act, but with harsh consequences. Decades of imprisonment. It hit even harder for Ryuk when he remembered Antares's own tale, the fact that he had been the smallest among the Etheirys barbarians. The one who couldn't forge because his tiny hands weren't even able to hold the edge of the forging hammer. In a race where worth was determined by being able to forge, how would life be for one who couldn't even grasp the hammer, let alone carry it? And yet, when he grew to be the strongest among them, he chose to risk his own life to ensure the survival of those who must have once looked down upon him for his difference. It begged the question, was it worth it? The answer was right in front of him, the singular statue in the center of the entire settlement. One that depicted a standing Etheirys barbarian, his gaze raised into the air while firmly grasping two axes in both gauntlet arms. Even after all these years, the statue remained, and now that he had returned alive to them, the joy was unprecedented. It also gave Ryuk a reality check. What if he had killed Antares instead of sparing him back when they had met in the Niagara ruin? He had been instructed by the trial rule that only one person would leave the room alive, him or Antares. But Ryuk had found a loophole in the rules and sent Antares out into a different pocket of space, his void rift. But what if he had chosen to kill him instead and simply moved on to the next trial? Antares would have been nothing more than a blockade in his path, one removed without a second thought. But that simple blockade was a selfless, almost foolish man who gave everything away for his race. The hope of thousands could have been unknowingly killed, all because he had been viewed as an obstacle. Power! He muttered beneath his breath, raising his palm to his face. It lowers the inherent value of life. Power makes life easy to rip away, as right now, if he so willed, he could slaughter all of the Etheirys barbarians in this place. This was the hard truth of power. It lowers the inherent value of life due to the ease with which it can be taken. But sometimes, the most powerless-looking, like Antares, can have more meaning than even the most powerful, like him. If one loses himself to power, he or she would bring nothing but destruction to the beauty that life could hold. His fist unconsciously clenched at the thought, his eyes regaining a deeper, almost dead calm, before a flickering white flame subtly brightened, flaring wilder within their depths. A smile broke on Ryuk's face. I've never thought of it like that before. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, and he turned to find someone walking to him. If it isn't the barbarian hero himself in the flesh, Ryuk called out, looking at Antares, who stepped forward while chuckling. I'm not a hero. You of all people should know that, he responded, coming to stand by Ryuk's side, resting on the railings. Both of them turned to look down, their eyes unconsciously trailing toward the large statue in the center of the settlement. Everyone in here will argue the opposite, though, Ryuk muttered beneath his breath, just loud enough for Antares to hear. I never knew, Antares said, pausing as Ryuk turned his attention to him. Knew what? Ryuk asked with interest. That they would still remember me after so many years. For a time, I was always worried I'd never be recognized or belong. His voice was low, almost to himself, before he sighed, clearly troubled. What's wrong, Antares? You seem worried about something. Ryuk noticed. Antares turned to him, his troubled expression quickly changing to his wide grin again. What are you saying? Antares deflected, trying to sound like things were fine as usual, but he watched as Ryuk looked blankly at him, before turning his gaze to the crowd of Etheirys barbarians. From the side, Antares could see a faint smile. You remember the first time we met? Ryuk asked, reclining against the railings. Antares nodded. Yes, I remember whooping your ass quite badly, he added, making Ryuk's eye twitch, though he continued. You were imprisoned, Antares. And truthfully, you were awaiting death, weren't you? Ryuk asked rhetorically, continuing before Antares could reply. Right then, I can guess you most likely never thought about finding the tribe again, or worried about being recognized or belonging. You thought they all never survived after all. But then you got out, learned of their existence, and saw the possibility of returning to what you gave your life for. Still, you doubted. Maybe they don't recognize me anymore. So much time has passed. I'd never fit into their world anymore. You thought. Ryuk turned to look at him. But now you've found that not only are you recognized, you're well remembered. Now all those sacrifices and pain are more than worth it, don't they? Antares only hummed under his breath. Hence, you wish to settle down, don't you, Antares? Ryuk asked, watching as Antares remained reclining, looking silently into the distance. It was silent, but the silence was louder than any spoken answer. I understand, Antares, Ryuk said. But Antares replied, I always told myself, Ryuk, I would live this new life of mine in your cause, having your back. I swore it to myself many times. The sound of iron twisting apart could be heard as Antares's hand clenched the railing so tightly it bent under his grasp. Now, I feel like a traitor just for even having the thought of. You found your peace, Antares? Ryuk cut in, locking eyes with him. You fought for this with all you had, and you won. Now you feel safety and peace in what you fought for. That feeling isn't wrong, nor traitorous. It's natural. Antares opened his mouth to reply, but Ryuk stopped him. You wish to follow me, like a knight to his master. Ryuk's voice was calm, but Antares's eyes wavered. I see your actions, Antares, and for as long as it lasted, you have been a good knight. Now, you deserve your peace. I'll be fine. I always am, aren't I, Antares? Ryuk smiled, but Antares could see it. The sadness in those shimmering purple irises. It left him lost for words. He had once seen anger in those eyes, pain too, but never sadness. He felt something wet on his cheek, and when he swiped at it, he found tears glistening on his fingers. I'm crying, Antares asked in shock. The last time he cried, he couldn't even remember. Not in over 500 years of memories. He was pulled from his thoughts when Ryuk's arms wrapped around him in a deep embrace. It stunned him, but his arms folded in and held tightly. I will never forget. Antares swore amidst tears that spilled like a wave. He could feel the pain. The pain of parting was so vivid, like a blade stabbed through his heart. I will never forget, he swore again. Silence fell over the balcony for a long time before footsteps approached. They parted from the hug and turned to see clan leader Daragwa, who wore a strange expression before quickly reading the mood. You've decided to leave? He asked. Ryuk nodded, a smile forming. Thank you for your hospitality, he said. No, I should be the one to thank you for your mercy and kindness. The Etheris barbarians will forever be grateful, Daragwa replied with a bow. Ryuk gave one last look at the Etheris settlement. The gentle breeze sent his hair flowing rhythmically as he listened to the chatter and laughter. So peaceful, he thought, and truly, only such a place was deserving of one like Antares, not his dangerous, chaotic side. Silently, he turned to the clan leader, who gave a firm nod and stretched his hand forward. A golden gate appeared in the air, and Ryuk stepped toward it. One more step before crossing fully, he paused and looked back. Goodbye, Antares. Those were the last words Antares heard from him. They left a deep ache in his soul, but in that moment, he also saw Ryuk smile, happy for him despite the parting. It was a bittersweet feeling, leaving him both guilty and fulfilled. Ryuk, Antares whispered as the teleportation gate vanished. The sound of space itself cracking under his grip echoed, as his fingers clenched into a fist, but then his hand relaxed. A confident grin returning. You're one special being, Ryuk. When Ryuk stepped through the golden gate, The world was silenced for a while. A deep silence as all thoughts faded from his mind, leaving him blank for a moment. The sudden golden rays were what awoke him, as he once more appeared outside, finding the sleek Snowdoe craft hovering before him, and unconsciously, he exhaled. With Antares having found his home, one of his goals was fulfilled. All of a sudden, Ryuk felt a ripple of energy, one that sank his heart straight into his heart, as his gaze instantly concentrated on the hovering spacecraft. One moment he stood outside it, but in the next he glitched away from the space and he was immediately inside it. The scene he saw made his eyes furrow in confusion. He was standing in the pilot room, which still looked like a regular living room, except there was no gravity. The sofas, the tables, everything was hanging in the air. But what was truly shocking was the fact that Isha, Void, Elder Selene, and even Rakshasa herself were all floating in the air, just like the tables and chairs. What was more, they appeared to be frozen mid-motion. Their eyes widened as they hovered in the air without moving. Just what's happening? Ryuk unconsciously muttered beneath his breath. Sobi. He heard the sound of silent sobbing, and he turned his gaze to a corner of the room, where he found her, crumpled to her knees, with rainbow tears dripping all over. Her rainbow hair was billowing around her, glowing with a light that created ripples, which destabilized gravity and kept everything in its original motion. His presence seemed to awaken her, as she raised her tear-marred face. All of a sudden, the tears paused, then flowed even harder. He watched as she wobbled to her feet, running towards him, and Ryuk's instinct kicked in. He took a single step backward, raising his hands as he prepared to crush the space around her. But all of this only happened in his mind. He felt the shake that sent him a couple of inches backwards as she jumped onto his chest, her tears raining down his shoulders. "I thought you were gone." The words echoed directly in his mind, and Ryuk could only stare in blank confusion before his hand moved, gently tapping her back in a quiet gesture of comfort. It worked wonders, as her tears dried up soon enough, and she jumped back to the ground, flashing that big smile once more. "So, what are you doing to my friends?" he asked, turning to look at the hovering group, and she also looked at them. Ryuk noticed from the side that her face contorted in slight displeasure. "They were trying to leave without you," she said, and Ryuk looked silently at her before shaking his head. "They were probably just trying to move the ship around, and she took it for them leaving without me. Let them go. I'll talk to them," he said to her, and a moment later, he watched as the bright light from her hair dimmed and then, every object hovering in the air came crashing down, and the group was no exception, each of them slamming face first into the ground. "What happened?" Elder Selene said groggily, holding her head, but then, something flashed past her with speed, as she watched Isha burst forward, her hands having morphed into claws. The space was ripped into nothing, leaving a swirling black hole as Isha's claws slashed forward with incredible power towards the rainbow-haired girl. But she wasn't the only one. In a moment, another claw slashed from the back as Rakshasa also moved and appeared right behind. Both of the claws were so big they covered the girl's entire figure, her eyes flashing with a bit of shock. But then, something flashed past, just as both claws smashed into each other. Kaboom! The shockwave of both attacks was enough to send forward an arc that completely sliced open a part of the ship, revealing the outside. Rakshas's and Isha's eyes flashed when they saw both of their claws locked into each other. Turning their heads at the same time to the side, they found their target in his hands. "Have you guys lost it?" Ryuk asked in shock, holding the girl in his arms. If he had not moved in that second, she most likely would have been ripped apart. And it happened so fast, it caught even him by surprise. "That girl is a monster," Rakshasa barked out in anger and caution as she looked at the girl in Ryuk's arms, her horns slowly ripping out of her head. "She needs to go. Now," she said, as she took steps forward towards him. Each of the steps left a dent in the floor as she began transforming into her full succubus form. Same for Isha, whose claws started to widen even larger. But then, Ryuk silently raised his hand, signaling for them to stop. They both did, their steps halting, and he silently kept his gaze on both ladies until eventually they gritted their teeth, their beastly transformation resetting back to their humanoid forms. With the steam in the air having cooled down, Ryuk continued. "Hey Void, can you help rearrange the sofas?" he asked, turning to look at the panther, who immediately moved its claws out. Mini void vortexes flickered into existence all around the room, and in moments, the chaotic mess of a room was restored to its original state. Ryuk moved his hands to the side of the ship, which had been sliced open, and with his sovereign rewriting skills, he was able to easily patch it back up smoothly. Right after, he moved to a sofa nearby, the little girl automatically tagging along with him, while the rest of them sat opposite him, looking at him with suspicious gazes. He spoke out. "Firstly, Antares has reconciled with his clan." The announcement cast a faint silence over the room, but it was soon broken by Void. "So the big guy found his home, huh? TSK, such good luck?" he said out loud, and it somehow lightened the pressure in the room. Antares had been with them since the beginning of the journey, and even though he was mostly quiet, his presence had always been there. When they came across danger, he moved first toward it to ensure their safety. Throughout the journey to the upper realm, he had been like a faithful guardian. To hear he was gone now was a bit saddening, but when they also thought of him having reconciled with his race, it made them happy instead. When Ryuk felt the group reconcile with Antras's absence, he continued. "Now, what's with calling her a monster and trying to end her? What happened after I left?" Ryuk asked, confused, and noticed them all turn to look at the girl. He turned to look at her, too, and currently her legs were swinging around the seat by Ryuk's side, almost like one who couldn't sense the pressure in the room at all. "After you and Antras left through the portal," Elder Selene began, "we all returned to the spacecraft. A couple of hours passed, and there was a small hailstorm. So, I tried to move the ship to a place less affected, and that was when she began. Her hair began to glow, and the gravity in the room destabilized with every object hovering into the air. The last thing I saw was Isha and Rak running toward her. Then light exploded and everything went blank," she explained. Faintly, Ryuk could piece things together. "What makes her a monster," Ryuk Rakshasa called out, "is that she possesses an energy far beyond what she looks like. There have been tales of otherworldly gods hiding their essence within lower beings. They always look harmless and innocent until the god takes over, and then they can render millions of people dead in a heartbeat. They call them god vessels, and while I doubted that before, I'm now 90% sure she's one." "Or how would you explain such a level of power?" she pressed. "God vessels. That was a new one." But he also knew Rakshasa was more knowledgeable than he was. Her words couldn't be doubted, and truthfully, her fears were reasonable. Rakshasa was at the Apocrypha stage, Elder Selene and Isha at the Eternity stage, yet all of them had been paused in place by her bizarre power. How could one so young possess such power? What was the source of it? "She was afraid you guys were planning on leaving without me. That was why she flared out," Ryuk defended, but Rakshasa only scoffed. "That does not explain her otherworldly power, and we've suffered twice now from her hands. The first time we couldn't get close to her or we risked getting forced to the ground. And now we couldn't get away from her, stuck and rendered unable to move an inch. We were defenseless, Ryuk. If she had grabbed a pipe and run it through our hearts, we wouldn't have been able to react. Who knows if that's what will happen next?" she said, her reasoning hard to ignore. Elder Selene spoke out. "You've helped her escape her imprisonment, Ryuk, just like you helped the others, too. But now, without the ability for effective communication between us all, her being here puts us all in danger." "I can effectively communicate with her," Ryuk replied. Silence reigned for a while before Elder Selene exhaled and debated before replying. "Can you guarantee that she won't flare out like she did before?" she asked, and Ryuk's eyebrows creased. That was a hard thing to guarantee. He barely knew her, and talking to her until she promised never to harm them again wasn't something that could be done in just a couple of minutes. "I can," he said, turning to them before continuing. "I just need more time." That is the only thing you don't have, Isha whispered silently beneath her breath, but it didn't escape his ears. It left him speechless for a few seconds. His lips opened to say something, but closed again eventually. Isha wasn't wrong. More time was the last thing he had right now. They don't want her around anymore, Ryuk. They're scared of her, and for good reasons. If you force her to remain, things might not end well. The system notification blinked before his gaze. So what should I do then? Throw out a little girl into the dark void. She might be a little girl, but she's not powerless. She'll survive. Tich. He clicked his tongue silently. The system had always been brutally logical, never wrong, but neither morally right. Fine, Ryuk called out to them, and they turned to him. She'll be leaving the ship. He watched as they silently exhaled in relief. Before that, let's go over the plan. How's Isha's memory deciphering going? Ryuk asked, getting into the important stuff as Elder Selim tapped onto the surface of the air rhythmically, and soon enough the holographic panel began appearing all over. She wiped 3 over to Ryuk, who widened them. A head bubbled up from the side, and he turned to find her big, rainbow eyes blinking at the golden panel. Rainbow hair spread over his shoulder. Somehow, he couldn't find it in his heart to be annoyed. What's this? She asked directly in his head, as Ryuk turned to the holographs. It's a map, he replied telepathically. A map, she whispered in return. That dot. Why is it blinking? She asked, and he turned to the map. On it, a red dot blinked steadily. That's where we are now on the map. And that blue circle, Ryuk said, pointing to the circle about 10 centimeters away from the red dot. The Beast Ha Ven Realm? She read out the label that circled it, albeit with slight difficulty. Yes, that's most likely where we will be heading next. We've deciphered Isha's memory, and it all led to that place, the Beast Tavern Realm. It acts as the special residence to all the bestial creatures in the upper realms. I'm sure if there's any place that could hold the ancestral home of the Frost Wyverns, it should be there, Elder Selim said as Ryuk hummed silently under his breath. Her words echoed in his mind. I wonder what the Beast Tavern Realm looks like, she said to Ryuk, whose fingers folded together, swiping and zooming the holographics into a tiny box before sending them back to Elder Selim. You know, he replied into the mind of the Rainbow Girl, we will be heading to the Beast Tavern Realm, and you'll get to see what it looks like soon, he said, smiling, which she returned with an even bigger one. But before that, I will be going to a different place, just as cool as this one. Really? She asked, and Ryuk nodded, rising to his feet. So, do you want to stay here with them, or? I'll come with you, she said before he could even finish, clinging to his legs. As expected, Ryuk thought silently to himself as he raised her onto his back. Then he moved his hands to the side, and a dark rift slipped out from the void, revolving. I'll be back soon, he said to the group before stepping into the rift, which immediately disappeared. They looked silently at the closing rift, but it wasn't long before they witnessed it bloom once more, and Ryuk stepped out of it. But this time it was different as only he stepped out. The Rainbow Girl was nowhere to be found. You threw her into your void rift? Void asked with a raised eyebrow. Of course, it had entered Ryuk's void rift more than a couple of times, so it could instantly identify it. Yes, Ryuk responded as Void's eyebrows twitched. How long did you plan on her staying in there? How did she even agree to stay in there? Why did you suddenly care so much? Ryuk replied with a helpless shrug. Don't tell me you placed her and ran back out as fast as you could? TSK. Such loneliest. As expected of a goof, Void mocked, running his claws through his tongue as Ryuk's expression plummeted. No, you lecherous bastard. And not like you even got a better idea, anyway, he said, but the Void Panther shrugged, clearly unaffected. He wasn't the one who saved her, so why would getting rid of her be his responsibility? Ryuk moved back to the sofa and lay on it. It had been around 3 days since he had spent time here in his main body. He had to return to his other body, and who knows, maybe Morgaine was even back already. Puff! A puff of black smoke, and right there on his chest was Void, looking at him with those ever-familiar skeptical eyes. Deciding to run off again? It asked as Ryuk raised an eyebrow. Run off? He asked, feigning ignorance, but Void nodded instead. Yes. Even an idiot with no brain would be able to sense you're not just sleeping. How? Imagine the high-energy Ryuk sleeping like a log every chance he gets? Doesn't make sense, does it? It asked him. You're not even doing anything to warrant trying to save energy, it said, more than sure of its words. Ryuk's eyes turned away from him to the side, and there, he could see them all looking at him suspiciously. Isha and Rakshasa. Elder Selene was busy working on holographic panels. With that, he could only sigh helplessly. Yes, Void. I'm deciding to run off again, he agreed as Void snickered in satisfaction. I swear I'm too smart for him. I want to come, it said, raising its head in disdainful pride. But it all ended when Ryuk grabbed it by the back of the neck and dropped it to the ground. No, he said, and a moment later, the chain on his hands lit up with dark abyssal energy that trailed over his tattoos, turning them black. A moment later, they all could hear his heartbeat slow to a crawl, and soon enough, he turned motionless. And like that, he's gone, Void said with a tired sigh as it stretched its back. But its body chilled up as it turned its head, watching Isha rise from the sofa and walk towards Ryuk. And as expected, the overclingy girl finally regains her sleeping spot, Void thought, watching as Isha approached Ryuk just like it expected. Wait, what is he? He asked. But then, its face changed massively as Void instantly puffed into the air and appeared right above Ryuk's chest. A mini shockwave bloomed through the entire room as Isha's frost claw slammed down straight onto Ryuk's chest, only to be blocked halfway by Void's claws. What do you think you're doing? Void roared out as its hands wavered, trying to hold back Isha's strength. But it was failing, as its dark, steely claws were being pushed down. TCH. Void clicked its tongue, and a moment later, a void vortex spiraled up its claws. Isha's claw entered it, and she was sent skidding away to the side all of a sudden. Hey, clingy girl, you better watch it. Trying to make a... It was saying when its speech choked up as Isha turned her eyes towards him. Holy! It cursed, looking at Isha's eyes. They had turned from pure silvery white to narrowed serpentine irises. That was a bad sign. Immediately, Void turned back to Ryuk, slapping him hard on the cheeks. Hey, wake up! It screamed, and immediately, Ryuk gasped as he felt his skill suddenly break. He opened his eyes, but not to the sight he was expecting. It didn't work? What's going on? He asked confusedly, feeling his head a bit groggy. But his eyes snapped open as he felt a terrible cold ooze from the side, and he caught the sight of Void quickly puff away from his chest, his presence disappearing completely from the room. His groggy head instantly cleared, and he sat up to find Isha walking towards him with a fiery expression. Ishia, are you okay? Ryuk asked, as she moved so close, her serpentine eyes mere inches from his own, forcing him back down to the sofa. The cold was so intense that Ryuk's breath turned cold too, his lips icing up with frost. When did her cold even become this cold? He wondered in disbelief. But things were only beginning to get worse, and quickly, too. Isha's eyes grew colder and colder, and before long, white scales started slipping from her cheeks as her serpentine irises gradually shifted to crimson. What's wrong with her? He was alarmed by the sudden change. Just a moment ago, he had left the room in quite a good state, and now she was like this. Host's pet Isha has been noticed to be undergoing a powerful emotional dissonance. Emotional dissonance recovered to be anger. Warning! Warning! Due to extreme emotional dissonance, Isha has begun reverting to a predatory state. If this continues, Host might lose control of Isha and might have to red aim her once more. No way! The vision of when she had last lost control made Ryuk's spine grow cold, and he called out, Hey Isha! Hey! What followed from her lips was a soul-wrenching growl, more beastly than human. It ripped apart any other thoughts from Ryuk's head, giving him the reality. Isha has once more lost control. In the next moment, his left hand shifted to the side, a dark light conjuring and revealing a dark grimoire. Its pages fluttered open as a dark vortex instantly appeared in the room, wrapping around both him and Isha, and in the next moment, the roar was abruptly cut off as Isha and Ryuk disappeared from the room. Still, the sudden roar was enough to make Elder Selene and Rakshasa shoot to their feet in shock. Things had changed so fast that they barely had time to even think of de-escalating the situation. But the next moment, something slammed into the ship from the side, sending the entire spacecraft roughly tilting. Elder Selene felt herself thrown across the room, only to be grabbed by Rakshasa, who managed to keep his balance. Immediately anchored, her hands moved forward, activating the controls and quickly bringing the ship to a stop. "What's happening?" she asked, looking to the side to see a massive dent in the ship. A dark puff of smoke billowed out, and they both turned to see Void floating there, his paws gliding over a holograph displaying footage of the Void. In the footage, two figures could be seen clearly amidst space-rendering explosions. "I think Isha just got a little bit mad at Ryuk," Void said with a helpless shrug. "Got mad at him?" They both had sat in the room, unable to think of any reason for her sudden anger. "But why?" Void unconsciously ducked his head as, in the footage, an ice pillar erupted, barely missing Void in the recording, and slammed straight into Ryuk, blowing him through a star body. "That must have hurt," Void thought, his fur rising in alarm. "He lied to her," he answered, resulting in light crisscrossing through the duo's eyes. Finally, they understood. "Will he be okay, though? She seems to have lost it," Elder Selene said in alarm, watching the unending barrage of explosions. A moment later, Rakshasa vanished from the room. "Nah," Void said. "They're both just being a little dramatic. I'm sure it'll end in another cringe hug soon." "You lied." The roar rang out in Ryuk's head so loudly it gave him a crippling headache, throwing his focus into disarray. In the next moment, he barely snapped his head to the side in time to see a massive tornado engulf him. Cold. It assaulted him like an unending barrage, chilling his blood, but only for a moment. Drawing both hands forward, an incredibly powerful shockwave rang out as Ryuk clapped his hands, the force sending the tsunami of frost blasting away. But the second it cleared, space before him unraveled into nothing as a pillar of ice hurtled toward him. 7 afterimages appeared, each showing the cut-off motion of Ryuk flashing forward, solidifying his fist before, boom, crashed straight through the pillar of ice. Purple cracks trailed through the pillar. The droning sound of something tearing apart rang out, followed by the entire pillar exploding into shards of frost. "Huh!" The gasp escaped Ryuk's lips as he witnessed thousands of snowflakes falling around him. He scanned the void and couldn't find Isha anymore. His gaze locked onto a single flake, noticing a bizarre runic symbol glowing on it. In the next moment, a claw of pure ice appeared an inch from his face. A new ability? That was his last thought before the world momentarily darkened. A sting of pain shot through him as the world blurred past. His motion stopped when his back slammed into a half-destroyed star body, blowing it to dust. But he remained floating in the void, seemingly unaffected by the collision. All around him, hundreds of snowflakes gleamed, each surface shimmering with light. Instantly, Ryuk's tattoos turned pitch black. His hands morphed into fearsome crimson claws, and just a moment later, thousands of claw images blasted toward him from the glowing snowflake symbols. Ryuk reacted instantly. Claws met claws in an unending barrage, tearing open a spiraling black hole in the void. A moment later, Ryuk ripped through the last wave of claw attacks, stepping out of the black hole, only to find a scene he had never expected nor encountered before. "What is this?" he muttered. It wasn't like a white room, but more of a white void. He stood in the emptiness, yet the sense of standing was warped. There was no platform beneath him. Looking at his own hands, he froze. They had no width, flat, like paper. No matter how he turned them, there was no side to catch the light. The edges simply vanished when he tilted them, like the world had erased a dimension. His breath caught. Even that felt strange, shallow, as though his chest could no longer rise or fall. He reached up to touch his face and felt nothing behind it, as if his skin and bone had been pressed into a single weightless sheet. Prickling unease crept through him. There was no behind anymore. No matter how he turned, the horizon remained the same, an endless, unbroken wall of white. What is this? It's like, warning, warning, warning. Host has entered a 2D dimensional domain. Dimensional incompatibility detected. Depth erasure initiated. Estimated completion. 1 minute. Failure to escape will result in permanent dimensional stasis. That is, Host will be eternally frozen as a 2D form, unable to move, breathe, or think while having his mind trapped in a single, unending moment that never progresses. What? It is simple, really. 3D is the life dimension, where most life processes, such as breathing and thinking, are made possible. When you're stuck within a 2D dimension like you are now, then you're locked into the limitations of the dimension, losing your ability to interact with the higher dimensions like 3D, where normal life processes occur. Your power slows down that process, but not forever, and you will still turn into a frozen sculpture in the end. The system explained, but it wasn't what Ryuk was asking. I'm not asking that. I'm asking how. How had she gained more power within the time frame, and I never knew about it? He mused silently, even though no words came out. Besides, why is she so suddenly mad? She was mad at me, not anyone else. So there must have been something I did or said that triggered her anger. It didn't take too much thinking before Ryuk was able to piece things together, and quickly enough, he had the exact reason why. When Isha and Antares had previously asked him why he needed to remain mostly asleep, he had replied, indirectly, that he was doing it to conserve energy, which was essentially a lie. But back then, with his discussion with Void, he had agreed that he was running off to somewhere. That confirmed he wasn't sleeping to conserve energy but going somewhere in his sleep. And he had foolishly admitted it and immediately gone back to sleep once more. Isha was clingy, often finding her peace by being wrapped around Ryuk like the serpent she was. But since the appearance of the rainbow-haired girl who never allowed anyone to get close to him, that space of hers with him had been temporarily cut off. She must have been holding it back for days, and when he finally removed the little girl who had been taking her space, he immediately went back to sleep, without a word to her for days. And just after confirming he wasn't resting to conserve energy, but for another reason entirely. It didn't make sense to be so infuriated over it, as even Void didn't care, just wanting to come with him. But to Isha, Ryuk knew it was a lot more complicated than that. And truly, it seems like I've been neglecting her, too. She awakened 2 more new abilities, and I never knew about it, only because I never stayed around her to even know it. I might be becoming neglectful. You have 5 seconds more before permanent stasis. The system notification blinked before him, as Ryuk exhaled. Even if it was just for 5 seconds, the absolute quiet was a good thing, and he found himself even a bit reluctant to leave. Still, he knew he needed to get out, as some of his memories were starting to get cloudy. He was just about to break free when suddenly, cracks trailed over the entirety of the dimension and then, it shattered into nothing like glass, raining down, as the dark void was once more revealed. But this time he stepped out to the scene of a ginormous 4-headed hydra. Yes, Isha had grown 1 more head, trapped within a pink-colored cage that completely held her in place. She thrashed wildly in the cage, but failed to break it apart, and standing above the cage, her claws reaching downwards while a runic pentagram floated in her palms, was none other than the Sakutara, Rakshasa. It seems she succeeded in trapping Isha, likely causing her to lose the ability to maintain her dimensional skill. Not her first time losing control? Rakshasa asked, turning her gaze to look at Ryuk, who silently floated towards her. She could sense it wasn't new to Ryuk, as his face was calm, not that of someone who was going through this for the first time. Yes, it's very rare, though, he agreed, his hands reaching forward towards the cage, where Isha lay entrapped. His hands hung a few inches before the cage as he closed his eyes, exhaling a bit before both eyes snapped open. When they did, a brilliant blue was flaring in their depths, a sign of King's aura having been activated. Isha thrashed around wildly, slamming her head and claws onto the bars and sending cracks through them as Rakshas's eyes narrowed in slight disbelief, sweat trailing down the side of her head. She's strong. She, a being at the Apocrypha stage, was struggling to hold down a beast at the Eternity stage? That was a testament to the power of the Frost Hydra beneath her. But the thrashing didn't last long. Sleep. The words echoed out like a beautiful lullaby that sent even Rakshas's head feeling a bit groggy, although she snapped out of it soon, but not Isha. With Ryuk's focus being on her while also activating Kin's aura, she wobbled a couple of times, thrashing faintly, before collapsing onto the cage ground. Her body returned to her smaller humanoid form as Rakshas's cage faded off into soft pink motes of light. Naturally, Ryuk caught her in his arms, and Rakshasa watched as even in slumber, she unconsciously snuggled deeper into him, like he was a flame in a frozen wasteland. Even after just trying to get rid of him from her natural predatory state, her body still naturally craves his presence. Just how does he build such firm bonds with the beasts, with such abnormally powerful beasts? It can't just be that weird skill of his. It's something deeper, Rakshasa mused silently to herself. She had noticed Ryuk possessed that weird skill of his that made any beast around him subservient to his will once he activated it. On seeing it, she had gotten an explanation for how he had been able to tame Void and Isha, who both had a potential that seemed somehow out of this world. Although it had always confused her why he only had 2 beasts when he could have had more with such a skill. But now, seeing the scene of Isha coiling to him, she knew it was beyond just that skill. There was something deeper that she was never aware of. Still, something in her was blooming from the sight of them both. Something abnormal. Still, thanks for the save, Ryuk called out, waking Rakshasa from her thoughts as the Snowrdo craft floated forward, its hatch opening up for both of them. You would have gotten out anyway, she said with a shrug, continuing up the open hatch. Ryuk followed inside, Isha in his arms. Soon enough, the hatch shot closed and the Snowrdo's entire surface thrummed with power, sending a ripple of white frost-like energy before shooting into the distant void, fading completely from view. I guess the mission took a toll on you. You've been off for 5 days now. The words echoed in the dining room, where Ryuk sat opposite old Jack, who chewed on his food. The calmness with which he ate surprised Ryuk a bit, since in this house, old Jack would usually rush through the dishes, due to his need to arrive early to work. He unconsciously turned up his holograph and raised an eyebrow when he saw the time. Turning to look at old Jack, he saw him flashing a satisfied grin, seemingly waiting for something. You woke up quite early today, old man, Ryuk spoke, watching the man's grin stretch wider, but he wasn't going to let him have it. What's up? Got threatened with a sack for being late before? He added, watching in satisfaction as old Jack's expression immediately plummeted. TSK, you wish, he said with a humph, causing Ryuk to chuckle happily. And joke's on you, I've gotten an even better job than my last one, old Jack said, making Ryuk pause mid-step. Jack's grin widened even more. You sure it ain't just a dream? You know, old Jack, it's a good thing to dream of a hire. It's not a dream, you bloody mutt. Old Jack silenced him with exasperation, while Ryuk rolled his eyes. Congratulations, then. Tell me, what are you doing now? Ryuk asked, watching as old Jack humphed in pride. Take a guess, he said, watching Ryuk pause before his grin stretched from ear to ear. You really want me to ruin your mood today? Old man? Ryuk teased. It's like a lower butler job with one of the royal houses, Jack answered himself, and Ryuk's brows rose in slight surprise. The royal houses only ever related to angels at the Archguard levels. Old Jack was only a fallen, a position not even worthy of staying too long in the sight of a royal. Somehow, it was a thing to be proud of but also alarming, as Ryuk knew dealings with royalty were like dancing on a thin rope. "Yes," old Jack said. "How did you even get the job?" Ryuk asked curiously. "I met this angelic seraphim lady. She's a seemingly ordinary and regular reader at the library where I worked, and of course with my godly charm that was too hard not to notice," he added, emphasizing the last part, making Ryuk roll his eyes. "She finally revealed her deep interest in me," he continued. "Oh really? Deep interest, huh?" The voice came from the stairs where Mrs. Linnea was calmly stepping down, an eyebrow raised at him while her hands continuously tapped on her holograph. "I mean professional interest, of course, my love," he corrected with a smile that made Ryuk grin. "And through her I got the offer. It's essentially making sure the lower royal workers are properly managed and do their jobs." "Like a supervising position?" Ryuk asked, and old Jack nodded. "You nailed it." "I have to agree," Ryuk said, then muttered in a lower voice. "As much as I hate to admit it, that's quite the level up. From a bookshelf arranger to a supervising position in a royal house." Old Jack's chest unconsciously rose higher. "I told you, I just need some time to adapt to this place, and soon enough, all of Amamora's control will be in the center of my palm," he declared grandly. But then he noticed Ryuk's expression sour, and even his wife was staring with the same doubtful look. "What?" Jack asked. "You said the entirety of Amamora's control being in your palm?" Ryuk asked, and old Jack replied. "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing," Mrs. Linnea said, "except it seemed eerily similar to Endearth, when you had everything under your control." Old Jack scratched the back of his head. "Of course, that won't repeat itself. It'll be for good this time, I swear it," he said, the pressure in the air dissipating only slightly. "Don't tell me they allow you to walk into the royal house and then return back home the same day?" Ryuk asked. "Yes, that's the catch," old Jack sighed. "Today is Monday, and I'll only be able to return on Friday evening. I've only got 2 days free in a week." Ryuk hummed. He knew there was no way the angelic royals would allow someone to walk in and out of their mansion daily. Although it appeared harmless, it still posed a potential risk to the family. "You know," old Jack said, leaning closer toward Ryuk while covering his mouth from his wife, "I've been given quite the big mansion back in the royal house, and I've been thinking, won't it be great if we all moved?" "That won't be happening." He was immediately cut off by the unforgiving words of Mrs. Linnea, who continued her meal without a care. Old Jack could only sigh. He had always tried to convince his wife to move closer to the royal houses, where life was more comfortable, and he could remain closer to his family, but no matter what, she always shut the idea down. Still, he mentioned it to Ryuk, hoping he might persuade her. The young man kept eating quietly without questions, a sign which old Jack understood to be that of quiet understanding. The powerful sound of hooves clanking against the ground echoed from the door a few minutes later. Old Jack disappeared into the carriage pulled by the 3-horned white horses, creatures Ryuk couldn't identify but which seemed otherworldly. Silence soon reigned in the dining room after his departure, leaving just him and Mrs. Linnea. "You don't wish to join him in the new place he mentioned?" "Why?" Ryuk finally asked, breaking the silence. Mrs. Linnea finished the work she was doing on her holographs and could finally turn her full attention to the dish before her. She answered while eating. "He works for one of the 5 most powerful angelic houses on Amamora, the Nobita Angelic House. Recently, they have been the center of attention due to the rumor that they're closer in power to the 3 supreme houses, and might even be thinking of challenging the top 3 and joining their ranks. It's all muddy waters in that house," she answered, chewing silently. "And while I don't mind Jack working there, since his position is low enough to keep him out of the spotlight, I still don't want myself, you, Morgaine, or Jack himself dragged into royal affairs again. That's why I didn't agree to move with him," she explained at length, but it helped Ryuk fully understand. In the family, Mrs. Linnea could be said to be the smartest and most knowledgeable. And due to once being an ex-half-fallen one, she was not only intelligent but also had experience with things that often concerned royalty. Since she had mentioned starting clean here in Amamora, It made sense that she didn't want to get tangled up in what she had dealt with in the past. "I'm currently doing an important research, Ryuk," she suddenly said, drawing his attention. "What's that?" "Morgaine didn't come back home," she said simply, but it was enough to make Ryuk's heart unconsciously sink in his chest. He had expected to be told she had returned while he was asleep, but now things were different. "But she made a video call with me and Jack just 2 days ago." "What did she say?" Ryuk asked, curious. "Not much. Just a reason why she wouldn't be able to appear, and it was a lame reason. She said she was at an important threshold of her training, close to a breakthrough or whatever." Mrs. Linnea narrated, clearly unimpressed and even a bit mad. "She asked how we were doing and if you were okay. But it somehow seemed half-hearted for some reason. Her tone was oddly cold, devoid of warmth or emotion," she said, as Ryuk's eyebrow knitted. "Whatever it was, the Morgaine that video called me wasn't the Morgaine I know. There was this aloof light in her eyes. All I got from that call was that something is wrong," she concluded before turning to Ryuk. "So, I did some research into what it even meant to be a family's chosen, and, even with all the access, I only got a tiny bit of information here and there. Anything related to being a chosen is tightly secured and guarded by the powerful fallen angel families. But still, I got a lead from my research, and that's the location of a book that will shed light on what being a chosen means. It is present within every royal fallen angel family's main building," she said, as Ryuk hummed. "You want me to get the book?" he asked, as she nodded and raised her palm. A tiny circular technological artifact appeared. "There's only one copy of that book within every family, so taking the book away will cause a big wave. But it doesn't have to be taken away in the first place if it can be copied. Just place this tiny button on the book's page, and when it makes 3 beeping sounds, it means it has already copied the content of the book. I will be able to decode it with my comms, hence uncovering the information within and learn whatever the Dominaire family is hiding from us," she said, as Ryuk took the button. A moment later, it disappeared into his shop space. "Wherever the book is, it'll be heavily guarded, perhaps even the most guarded place in the entire royal grounds, and you can't afford to be seen or even noticed," she said, as Ryuk nodded confidently. "I'll try," he said. "Good. Don't pressure yourself too much about it. Go when you're confident. Also, if you choose to head into the Dominaire family ground to copy the book, then don't bother asking Morgaine if you meet her," she said, drawing Ryuk's attention. He had unconsciously welcomed that thought. "But why?" "Because I asked her when she called, and she found a way to walk around the question, leaving me with nothing in the end. She's being silent about it. I don't think it'll be much different if you ask her personally, and if you don't know that, she might end up blowing your cover. So be careful," she said as Ryuk hummed, pausing a bit to look at Mrs. Linnea. "Ash." His irises faintly widened. It didn't escape her notice. "What is it?" she asked as Ryuk giggled. "For a second, you remind me of the half-fallen one," he said. "I guess it'll take some time for me to shrug that attitude off," she answered in exasperation, as they both continued eating. She took the chance to ask him about his last mission and how his journey to the upper realm was going. He didn't hide anything from her, keeping her updated. In return, it left him feeling a weight lift off his chest as he narrated his experiences so far. "You're making fast progress, Ryuk. Very fast, even," she said, her hand moving to pat his shoulder. "Just don't rush things too fast. Okay? It's good to relax and get off the pilot's seat once in a while. Trust me, it'll help keep you grounded for the challenges ahead," she advised, as Ryuk nodded. "I'll try," he said, earning her proud smile. "That alone will be enough." After the dinner, Ryuk spent a couple more hours at home before eventually deciding to move out and get some things done. His first target? Meeting up with Odette. When he stepped outside, he didn't need to walk for too long before he found an Ammonius driver and quickly boarded. 10 minutes later, Ryuk got down, mixing with the crowds for some time before he branched into a dark alleyway, devoid of any living soul. Stretching out his hands, his void grimoire appeared, and a vortex soon spiraled in front of him. Stepping in, he completely disappeared from the alleyway, and when he reappeared, he was standing atop a mansion, by whose side was the mansion Odette had forcefully taken control of. He had not teleported directly into it, as he didn't know what state the mansion was in, or if it had been forcefully taken back. The latter was more expected, but surprisingly, everything looked calm. There were no danger tags written everywhere, no archguards walking around the mansion, nor cracks that showed signs of battle. People continued their walk like things were normal and nothing had changed. With one more step, Ryuk disappeared and reappeared inside the mansion's gate, taking steps forward and approaching the large golden door. He raised his hand to knock, but paused when he turned to the side and found a white letter left on the stairs. "Oh!" He mused silently under his breath, bending to pick up the letter. On it were the words, "From the Mundus family." The Mundus, Ryuk muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing at the familiarity. He recognized it a second later. The Mundus, that was the surname of the old man who owned the mansion. But why would they even send a letter to Odette? He wondered silently when the sound of the golden door opening on its own echoed loudly as Ryuk turned to look in. This ought to be the living room of the house, but it was like a golden throne room for a king. Everything was gold. The sofa, the 5 chandeliers in the ceiling, the floors beneath him that rippled out a golden light with every step. Everything reeked of luxury, but even in this lavish building, one person seemed to command all the attention for herself. A purple-skinned lady in a black crown sat on the largest of the sofas, staring straight at Ryuk. It was Odette, and she had changed her clothing from her dark, eye-catching armor to something more humane. It was a pristine white evening gown that clung to her curves and pooled like liquid silk around her feet. At the side of it was a daring thigh-high slit that showed a glimpse of her leg, which was currently crossed over the other, making them seem even more defined. Her mere sight right now would make most men swallow hard, blood rushing faster through their heads. But not Ryuk. All he had on his face was a bit of relief, probably from the fact that she was still here, or that she had finally gotten rid of that eye-catching armor of hers. "You're late," she said as he fully stepped in, the door behind him shutting close. "I was a bit tired from everything, so I slept off," he responded. "Slept for 5 days?" she asked with a smirk, watching his expression. There wasn't much change in it. "Yes, I was," he replied simply, and she could tell it was the truth. "Anyway, I found this letter by the entrance," he said, bringing out the envelope. She wasn't that surprised to see it, almost like she had expected it. "Yes, some angel left it there 2 days ago," she said, and Ryuk paused. "And you didn't feel curious enough to check it out?" he asked. "I was waiting for you to bring it to me," she responded with a grin that made Ryuk's eyebrow twitch. For some reason, he felt like ripping the envelope apart, but curiosity got the better of him. "Whatever," he muttered under his breath, unfurling the envelope. He opened the folded paper inside, and Odette watched his eyes shift from side to side, his expression changing from calm to disbelief. Her eyes shone with a faint dark light, and once again, his thoughts became accessible to her, letting her read the letter as his mind interpreted it. "Dear Madam, when the true reality of you having seized for yourself my mansion settled upon me, the obvious move to take would have been to summon the Amamoran Guardians. A move I nearly did. But I have come to realize that the obvious move isn't always the right one. After 3 days of thought, I've decided you're not an enemy I want to waste resources on. Instead, you are a force I'd rather work with. You beat my best guards with relative ease, and I came to realize that taking the mansion back by force would only give me a building. Something irrelevant and purposeless. Keeping you as an ally instead would give me far more. That's why I'm letting you keep the mansion. Not as a surrender, but as my first gesture to you. I want us to meet. No weapons nor guards. Just a conversation. I have work that needs strength, skill, and the will to win. You, madam, have proven to me you have those. 3 days from this letter in the popular Dorothea Garden, exactly 100 kilometers away, by the first sight of sunset. I'll be there, by the side of the Dorothea waterfall, waiting for you. The mansion is yours, with no conditions except that you speak with me. Until then, Tori Mundus. The letter brought clear changes. For one, Odette's grin widened, a faint chuckle leaving her lips as she looked at him. The face of someone who just had his understanding of the world completely flipped upside down. He stood there rooted in shock, the letter silently slipping from his grasp. How? It was insane. His expectations had felt right and logical for the situation. A successful angel Tori Mundus. Old and definitely with good enough connections. His mansion was stolen from him, his guards beaten to a pulp, and he himself thrown out. The only logical reaction to that was to use his connections to forward a mission amongst the strongest of the archguards. Have them return to the mansion, capture Odette with force, and regain control of what was rightfully his. But this? Keep my house? But at least talk to me once? This felt pathetic and cowardly. Or wait, is this really a weakness? He mentioned Odette seeing him in a place, and also added that he has a job that needs to be done. Why does it seem like a recruitment letter instead? Could an old angel like that really be so cowardly? Was he really begging? Or did he instead realize he could build enough buildings if he wanted, but couldn't get someone like Odette to work for him, no matter how he tried? Did he give up the mansion, recognizing its worth as lower compared to having Odette work for him? But isn't trying to recruit someone like Odette a bit too risky a game? She has no reason to be loyal, nor would she care about his kindness in letting her take the building. Or is this all not a game of kindness at all? Wait, a game? He asked. Hundreds of thoughts and conclusions navigated through his ultra-high intelligence. Yet they were being brushed off just as fast, each conclusion leaving him even more confused. You know, Odette suddenly called out, dragging him out of his thoughts. Her hand moved to her hair, one of her fingers coiling it. I still remember your words that day. I believe it went something like, give it an hour, and this mansion will be surrounded. A man like that wouldn't just give up his hard-earned mansion to a thief, or shrink back from a threat. I believe your words were something like that, Odette said, using his exact tone of words while flashing him a grin of mockery. I'm just wondering what you think now, she said, as Ryuk picked up the letter, going through it 3 more times with a blink, before the letter itself was reduced to ashes. It doesn't make sense, he replied as she giggled. Who said it has to be? She asked in return, leaving him speechless. Your understanding of the world is very simple, Ryuk. Too simple. You may think to yourself that maybe that angel is a spineless coward trying to avoid confrontation, but when you think back to how shrewd he was, and the fact he was an old man and so successful, you know that conclusion is unreasonable. So you eventually put it as, I'm sure it's all just a ploy or a trap, right? She said, the exact conclusion Ryuk thought of. The old angel couldn't be naive or cowardly. So indeed, all of this must be a ploy of his. But ploy or not, I got what I want, didn't I? She said with a grin, as Ryuk's eyebrow furrowed once more in thought. But then, the air flapped as he suddenly felt his hands being grabbed and then pulled forward. A split second later, he found himself pushed onto the sofa, and a full second later, she was on top of him, sitting on his thigh while her purple eyes shone into his. The golden light in the room seemed to suddenly dim, eventually leaving the room dark, with only tiny motes of golden light crisscrossing around. You see, Ryuk? Her words were seductive, brimming with both danger and lust. It sent his heart beating faster within his chest as her breath trailed down his neck, her face hovering so close. There are some things that you don't say please to get, she whispered, and those words were like an electric current that made his heart, for 1 second, stop its beat. And when it did, the sound of flesh gently being pierced rang out, followed by that of something being sucked. The golden motes around the room brought some faint light to the view. 2 figures, a young man sitting on the sofa, and on top of him, a woman in a crown, her lips on the left side of his neck, gently sucking his blood. 30 seconds passed in this state before she broke off the contact. A shock pulsed through Odette's body right after, her hands gripping the sofa by the side of Ryuk's head. Her hands quickly shifted into claws as her body arched like a bow, eyes rolling to the back of her head. It was so sweet and fulfilling. Almost as fulfilling as a deserter who had finally found water after months of thirst. The feeling was intoxicating but also fleeting. In just 10 seconds, she regained her reason, leaning closer to Ryuk beneath her, his shoulders buried beneath her luscious dark hair. He could see the smile on her face, an oddly satisfied smile whose reason he couldn't quite understand. To think, 5 days without his blood would leave me so desperate. She thought silently to herself before voicing out her confusion. When I suck your blood, you're oddly subservient. More than one might expect. Ryuk? Odette whispered, while looking at the tattoos on his neck, watching her dark abyssal energy melt into those purple lights. She had seen him copy her abyssal energy once and had seen how his purple tattoos had adapted. But now she could see it. When she sucks his blood, some part of her abyssal energy drains into his bloodstream, and the tattoo around his neck changes, but not to copy her power. No, it was something different, something she couldn't quite lay her hands on. You're keeping secrets from me, aren't you? She said, giggling. And Ryuk responded, Can you get off me now? To his request, she surprisingly obliged without much argument, sliding off to sit back onto the sofa. Tapping by the side of her head, a golden notification panel suddenly flashed, a couple of holographs slipping out as Odette moved her fingers forward, tapping and scrolling. You got yourself an Amemoran comms? Ryuk asked in slight surprise. I did. You didn't think I would be sitting down idly for the past 5 days, did you? She asked him with an amused smile, only to get a cautionary gaze from him. What? I hope you haven't been doing bad things since your past exploration, he asked as she humphed. TSK, what do you take me for? Some unreasonable evil being? She scoffed. That's exactly what I think you are. He thought silently, only realizing she could read minds a second later. But her expression didn't change much, revealing she wasn't reading his thoughts. So, Tori Mundus proposed a meeting, and that should be this evening. Do you plan on meeting with him? Ryuk asked. Odette only shrugged. I haven't decided yet, she said, not much excited by the prospects, and Ryuk didn't press it. Who knew what job the angel was planning to assign to her? He turned his gaze away, furrowing a bit in thought, before he ultimately decided. Hey, Odette, he called, as her irises rolled to the side, staring at him. I want you to meet someone, he said, and she paused. Who? In response to her question, he stretched his hand before him, and Odette watched as the space collapsed into itself, soon giving way to a revolving pitch-black rift. All of a sudden, a bizarre light shone out from the depths of the rift, and something pierced out of it with speed. A rainbow beam of light slammed straight into Ryuk, under Odette's raised eyebrow. The hit caused him to lose focus on the rift, leading to its disappearance, but now there was another person in the room with them. A person who was currently wrapped around his chest like a snake, blocking his vision. A rainbow-haired little girl with a peculiar aura that made Odette slowly turn her gaze away from her and onto her skin. What she saw shook her to her core. The tiny strands of hair on her arms all suddenly stood upright, a sign she took as her own body's signal of fear. What? She thought in disbelief, turning to look back at the girl. She found a comical scene of Ryuk's hands holding the side of the girl's stomach before he finally pulled her off of him. Her hands kept reaching for his face, but failed by just a couple of inches. Okay, you miss me, I know. Can you stop being clingy now? He said to her telepathically, watching her hands grab him non-stop until she quieted down. He released his grip on her, only for her to fly straight onto his torso once more, hugging him even tighter. The dark is scary, she communicated telepathically into his head. He could only console her by brushing her hair down. Who is she? Odette's voice brought him back to reality, as he turned to find the purple-skinned Nihil holding suspicion and even slight caution in her eyes. I don't know her name, he said after a long pause. I was hoping you could help me identify exactly what she is, as she can't communicate with anyone nor even hear the sound others make. Ryuk explained, as the rainbow-haired girl turned her head. Her big, rainbow eyes blinked at Odette. She blinked thrice before turning back to look at Ryuk, and then her voice echoed in his head. I can hear and understand her, she said. Surprise crossed his eyes. You can hear her? He called out in shock. She nodded, and just a moment later, her lips moved and she spoke. Who are you? She asked. Though with slight difficulty, her words were clear to the ear. But the way the language came out wasn't exactly how it should sound. It was like a different language, but one that Ryuk interpreted as normal speech. Odette only looked at the girl coldly before turning to Ryuk. Have you gone mad? She asked him, and this time there was no grin on her face, only cold seriousness, as even her Amemoran calms were withdrawn, and she was fully sitting upright. I don't think so, Ryuk replied reflexively. Then why do you have a god's child in your possession? She asked, eyeing the girl as Ryuk's eyes narrowed in confusion. A god's child? What's that? He asked. Odette replied, but not with words. In the next instant, she rose to her feet, coming to stand before Ryuk, who had the rainbow-haired girl sitting on his lap, standing between them. A second later, the sound of bones cracking rang out as Odette's hands started shifting until they became sickle-like claws covered in abyssal energy. In the next moment, she swerved her claw backward, her body leaning forward in motion to attack. Then, the claw slashed forward with speed, slicing through space swiftly. Ryuk's eyes widened as the claw reached for the girl's back. But it was like iron clashing against iron. A powerful rainbow light flickered through the room as her hair brightened once more, resulting in the formation of a barrier that stood between the claws and her back. Cracks quickly crossed through the surface of the barrier as Odette pressed her claw further. But then, a hand covered in white scales flashed by, slapping Odette's claws away. It belonged to Ryuk. Do you know what art she just used? Odette asked, watching Ryuk, who now stood with the girl behind him, seemingly ready to confront her. But he paused when he saw that Odette's eyes didn't reveal bloodlust or anger. They were neutral instead. What is it? He asked in return, and she responded. Her god authority.